Mike Ratcliffe, a warm welcome, well, cool welcome to the Cellar Studio this morning. I just have to say that it is a great honor to have you here because the first time you invited me to something, I was a pipsqueak in the industry, a grain of sand, and you invited the bloggers of South Africa. At the time, there were maybe 5, to a Rootstock meeting in Stellenbosch. You might not even remember. I think it was at Warwick, and we had a braai. And for me, that just represents the journey that you've taken in the industry, where you've innovated, but you've also nurtured and grown and led. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you for that blast from the past, because it was such a crazy thing to be invited to this event with leading people in the wine industry. And we just written a few blog posts, and at that time blogs were the cutting edge of the industry. So thank you.
Great memories. I've got the memories tumbling back.
So Mike, I'm very excited to have you here today, because I think South Africa has an abundance of winemaking talent and viticultural talent, and often both wrapped up into one. But the world of South African wine potentially has a marketing problem or challenge. And you're one of I believe, the top brand builder and marketer in South Africa, in South African wine. And I want to chat about this disconnect where if you think France, immediately your mind goes to the first growths of Bordeaux or the Grand Cru vineyards of Burgundy or Champagne. Yet they make a lot of bulk, nasty wine, which I've drunk in the south of France in particular. If your mind as an international person goes to South African wine, it often goes to that great value Tesco's shelf. If you're a South African who is passionate about wine, it goes to all those gems that we know can compete with the best of the world. Where's this disconnect? And what can we do to fix it? And go.
I mean, it's a huge question. I've spent most of my adult life thinking about it, so you can be sure that I have some opinions on this. A very wise woman my mom once taught me is that you should start at the end and work backwards. Another wise man, my 25-year partner in Vilafonté, Dr. Phil Fries, he always started each meeting by saying, so let's talk about success. Let's define it.
What does it look
once
like?
We've defined what success looks like, let's make sure this meeting gets there. So I don't think that we've defined what success looks like as a country, and I say that today, and I would like to think that I won't have to say this next year, but I think we haven't defined success. If we move back to your question, the reality is absolutely spot on. We've got amazing winemaking talent and a pipeline. We've got amazing evolution of viticulture and wine growing in South Africa, and we've got a pipeline of new incredible varieties coming through. I think we can add to that the ridiculous and abundant, wonderful resource of diversity, both in terms of, firstly in terms of terroir, but secondly in terms of micro terroirs. And then just throw into that the often misunderstood age of our soils. You've got a perfect mixture to make exceptional wines. So how do you get to then a place where you define success? So I would say that a weakness that we have at the moment is that we make a lot of great wines, and you're thinking, what? We make a lot of great wines, but the reality is they're all made in small volumes. And even the guys that would fight with me and say, but I produce 10,000 cases. 10,000 cases on the global scene is irrelevant. You're a pinprick. So even at the low end, we don't have a single global brand. And that's just a reality. We do not have a high-quality product that could sit on a wine list in every European city, every Asian city, and every American city. And there are many examples around the world of the Antinoris and the Rothschilds and the Mondavis who have created these global brands. So I'm not sure that we will ever be able to achieve that because we simply don't have the land area, the water, the space. So I think for South African wine, firstly, in order to be successful, you need to be sustainable. an often confused concept.
Through the value chain, all the way through.
Through the value chain, but before you get onto the whole concept of sustainability, you need to start at ground zero, which is financial sustainability. There's no point planting organic cover crops if you're going to go out of business. So the average selling price for South African wine is too low to sustain the industry. And at the very top end, the same applies. There isn't enough return on investment at the top end to sustain the industry. And so you have this concept of BBWs, billionaires that buy wineries, and they fork out $1 million a month to keep their winery going. So I think we need to define where we want to be. As a country, I don't think we can aim to be a mass market, big brand. I don't think there will ever be a brand that can be in every restaurant in every major city in the world. So we need to target probably the mid-market, up-market, top-market tier, and try to find brands that are able to supply slightly larger volume. And at the risk of going on and on, I do think that we have a problem in that we still consider ourselves to be experimental, when a lot of the great wines in South Africa are not experimental. They are established. They're rolling out 10-year vintages, 10-year verticals, 20-year, 30-year verticals. We're no longer experimental, but we need to stop fragmenting. The great wines need to double down, build some volume, build some gravitas, and become accessible to the rest of the world. There was a great article written by Jancis Robinson recently, and the headline was, "Why do Americans not drink South Africa's greatest wines?" Fabulous question. And she went on and on and on, but I think she missed the point. Is in order for Americans to drink it, we need to send it. And at the moment, South Africa's greatest wines get consumed in Stellenbosch, Elgin, Cape Town. If there's a little bit extra, it goes to Joburg, and that's it. There just isn't that much volume leaving the market of the really great wines, because there's so much demand domestically.
Yeah, it's such an interesting one, because I look at since that bloggers meeting, things have changed. There's been some really positive change. I look at you think about all those pockets and farmers in the Octopal, Swartland area. Even in all parts of the wine growing regions, many of them are now growing grapes for the likes of the Malinois, for the likes of Vilafonté. So there's definitely been this sort of improvement in building brands that are obviously growing. They've got an international base. To gain scale, it's not just about buying land, but acquiring or renting really competent farmers, because South Africans are competent farmers on the whole.
And we need them.
Yeah.
They are a massively important part of the value chain. That needs to be compensated.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is, we've got a tiny little farm at Belfield, and we do grape farming, but it's much easier for us to, as a small farm, to ask for that higher price per ton. But how have you gone about that? How's that? I mean, have you seen the impact on farming grapes already in the last 5 years, 10 years? Or is it just not enough?
Well, there's
from a sustainability perspective.
There's a big macro impact, and some people see it as a negative. I don't. I see it as a positive. Commentators often point to the shrinking vineyard area of South Africa as a negative. We must therefore be going backwards if we have got fewer and fewer vineyards every year. Some people confuse it with the rise of citrus. That's the most common story that gets told.
So it's just getting ripped out and swapped.
Farmers are pulling out their vineyards and planting citrus because they get a much better return on equity. But of course they do. The vineyards that they're pulling out were the unsuccessful ones. Charles Darwin had something to say about that. It's the survival of the fittest. And over time, if we're not applying at least some Darwinianism and ripping out the crap and planting more good stuff, we're not going to go forward. So I think that if you were to take somehow, metaphorically, the entire harvest of 2010 and you were to pour it all into a single tank and taste it, and then do the same thing for the national harvest of 2022, the national South African harvest of 2022 will taste much better, dramatically better. So going back to your question about farmers and farming, people that can't cut it are gone. Consolidation is replacing fragmentation. Not because people are sitting in a boardroom saying we should consolidate, it's because they consolidate to survive, to develop economies of scale. And that's pure pragmatism, and it's capitalism at work. I'm not talking about the actual grapes, but these things are natural trends moving forward. I think that there's been, certainly over the last few decades, there's been a professionalization of vineyard growing to become viticulture, to become wine growing. I think that's probably a Maslow type hierarchy. You either grow grapes or you are a viticulturalist, or ultimately you're a wine grower. And I think we're moving towards a greater level of wine growing, planting vineyards for a specific objective. Again, let's plant a vineyard, but let's talk about what success looks like, and plant the vineyard to match that success. Planting by design, and I think that's happening more and more. And just to double down on your question, because I waffled a bit, to double down on your question, the price per ton, price per litre, tonnage per hectare, price per hectare, all these kind of metrics are really important. They are true sustainability. And if wines are achieving a higher price and on a decent margin, then you can afford to pay for the grapes that you actually need, pay well, and make sure that your supply chain is sustainable. And then just one last comment about that is there is a greater amount of purpose in viticulture in South Africa, where farmers that farm for a living are actually planting what they know they're going to get the most money for. And so if you are choosing to go with, let's call it domestic niche varieties, doesn't mean they're obscure, just niche varieties like Rieslings and Pinot Gris and, we can go on and on and on. You actually have to consciously plant that with a purpose in mind, because people are not planting it with the hope that somebody's going to go buy it.
Yeah.
And it's a fundamental change over time, which I think is probably a trend. And I think the trend will deepen, and we'll be moving to a greater professionalization of the wine industry. And you could apply this to pretty much any industry. Once it becomes more professional, it becomes more successful.
I think, and that's a really good point, Mike, because I think it's a South African thing, right? On Sunday, the papers are either the Springboks are the best or we've lost all hope, and I think sometimes that's the feeling one gets in any industry, and the wine industry in particular, we're quite self-critical. But if you look at it objectively, this concept of specialization, 100%, we're seeing that now where farmers are not just being tasked to farm grapes for bulk wines for whoever it might be, but they're also being tasked to farm ultra premium wines for aforementioned brands like yourself, Vilafonté, Malinu, De Turin. There's many examples of that, and that's exciting because that gives that speciality and focus. The same's happening where some farmers are just deciding, well, actually, I'm going to plant more apples and and take out my vineyard,
and they'll be very successful.
And that's fine, because that's part of the speciality consolidation process. And then that concept of wine by design, absolutely, I think we've seen that a lot more. I think you were a pioneer in that, De Turin, absolutely. And then you spoke about the pipeline of viticulturists and winemakers. What about the pipeline of marketing, brand building, sales? Because that's actually such an important engine, and it's a topic that's obviously quite dear to my heart. Where do you think we are in that regard?
Well, there is a very fine line when it comes to separating art from business, and it's not always easy to identify where that line is. I've spoken to a number of winemakers where I've said to them, well, if you were looking to be more successful, perhaps you could not do this and not do that. And they are adamant that they're not going to do that because they love it.
The barrel of Pinot Noir sitting in the Swartland, maybe. Yeah.
And so that's the artist at work.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important. I don't think it'll ever be extinguished, the artistic side of wine. In fact, I think it's flourishing.
The romantic, yeah.
But you could also talk about the old story that the starving artist produces the greatest art, and the most tormented poet produces the real gems that have been defined by history. And I think there is an element of that, but it doesn't have to be like that. I think that line is moving probably more towards pragmatism out of necessity, because you can only be a starving artist until you starve to death. And so I think the wine industry is finding that line is drifting more in the direction of good, practical, common sense when it comes to business, that you need to actually firstly make what the market wants, you know. But Steve Jobs' famous quote about nobody ever asked me for an iPhone, I think holds true.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really ever asked South Africa for old vines. Yet we created this incredible, remarkable old vine concept, which at the bare minimum is a great story, but at the maximum is bringing to life these heritage vineyards that are producing these absolutely exquisite wines. That's art, but it's art merged beautifully with the pragmatism of business, of actually making sense. Now, I'm quite critical that these incredible wines or these incredible stories that actually taste good, taste good is important. But, you can pick them up for nothing.
Undervalued.
They're cheap. I think we've gone halfway. I think we've defined the art beautifully. I think we've created products that are massively desirable for the world, but they've been positioned too cheap, and the great wine collectors of the world won't buy them because they're not used to spending that little, and it can't be good. That's pragmatism. That's hard pragmatism at work. So somewhere in this murky pool lies the balance. We don't all want to be making jumping kangaroos and whispering angels and things like that, made in tens of millions of cases. But at the same time, a successful industry financially will allow the artists to perform at a high level. It's an age-old debate.
It's such an interesting one, because the old vines, I've latched onto this phrase pipeline that you used earlier, but the old vines concept has also created this pipeline for constant new old vines.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing thought, because suddenly a farmer thinks twice before ripping out old Cinsault or Shannon, somewhere on an obscure hill, overlooking Riebeek West. And that's really exciting. I think the interesting one for me, which I recently spoke to a winery, and a winery don't work with, but just had an interesting conversation around Africa and building out marketing. And what stuck in my head was, we've traveled once to this market. We're not going to go back until we need our order. It's not an order from us, it's an order from a potential client. And it just struck me that these wineries that are investing a huge amount, whether they're billionaires behind them or not, in vineyards, they're investing in cellars, tasting rooms. There's a huge amount of capital that goes in. But that 20,000 Rand trip, that's it. You've got to get results, and it takes a huge amount of time to build relationships, because wine's a relationship business, to build relationships, to understand markets, to really dig into it. I mean, are we under-investing in that side of the business?
Yes. It's a very simple answer. You need to be out there. You need to speak to the people that are buying your product, up to the point when they feel that they've absorbed sufficient knowledge that they can be as good as you at communicating on their product. So yes, I think that can apply across the board. However, I have some thoughts on that too. Is that, and actually I tweeted about it this morning, is what I see so often is you get a beautiful winery that has a lovely product. The product is often not completely thought through about why am I producing it, who am I producing it for, but let's just assume.
What does success look like?
What does success look like? And then the marketing department is tasked to develop an export market. And so they say, okay, we're going to go into these top 10 markets. And off they go. But you can't possibly take one, maybe two people and spread them across 10 countries. You know, one of the countries might be America, one might be UK, one might be Germany, one might be China. It's the world. It's basically impossible to spread yourself across those markets. And so my feeling has always been that we lack focus. Almost across the board, almost every winery that has an export strategy, they feel comfortable in sending half a pallet here, half a pallet there, and it all adds up to 10 pallets, and they feel very proud of themselves. But the economies of scale aren't there. They don't have the budget to be able to service those markets. And my advice has always been, based on Zelma Long, my partner, she told me, she said, Mike, do business in places you like to visit. Do business with people that you like, and then you'll never work a day in your life. So my advice has always been, pick somewhere that you like, or somewhere you got a reason to visit. Maybe you got a mate in London, so then London's your market. Maybe your best friend lives in Zimbabwe. Or if
Someone's got a lodge in Tanzania. Hit it.
For example. So find somewhere that you like, because almost everywhere is a market. And then go there often, and go there regularly, and build relationships, make friends, be vastly successful. And when you feel that you've exhausted the potential of that market, rinse and repeat, pick another market. But this idea of taking a 1,000-case winery and dividing it up across 10 countries, it's just not doable. It's unrelatable to reality. So going back to your point, absolutely. I see it too often is that people have R1 million barrel budget, but 100,000 rand marketing budget. It's like, this doesn't gel really.
Yeah, it's and it kind of goes back to that focus and building depth rather than breadth. And it's an interesting one. Like if I were to, if we run a thought experiment, if we were to ask every single winery in South Africa that from the 1st of August, you have to halve your portfolio from 10 to 5, from 20 to 10. And you can choose, and there's mechanics where you can merge bottles together or whatever. I mean, I almost feel like the end outcome of that might be more successful businesses, potentially. It's an interesting thought experiment. Maybe not with your three wine approach, but if you've got 30 wines in a portfolio, and we know the laws of economics, the 80-20 rule, you know, that could be an interesting outcome.
As you know, I run a wine business advisory company, and so I get to see wine businesses across so many different spectrums, and that would solve so much. It would make my services and our services redundant in so many ways.
Okay, we better not talk about it then, Mike.
But you need to answer the question about who am I? What am I? Why does anybody care? And if you go to a consumer or the trade and you say, listen, I've got these 32 wines, each one of them in its own right is one of the best in the world, you know, there's no credibility in that. And the chances are very small that they're going to taste them all. The chance is 0 that they're going to list them all. So you're going to force them to pick and choose. They'll probably choose, on average, over time, they'll choose the 5 or 6 wines that you should probably be making anyway. So, but that comes back down to how we started with define success and work backwards. Success is not 35 wines. I mean, if you're making 100 million cases, 35 wines is probably not that much. But if you're producing a small 1,000 or 10,000 cases, it's like crazy. It's not right. But I think that it's more important to know what you love, because the common denominator between most of the successful wines in the world is that there's deep passion and huge love, and there's no adherence to working hours in making the great wines of the world. People knuckle down and throw their entire life into the great wines of the world, and you can't do that on wines that you're not passionate about. So in the same way that my advice has always been to pick a market, double down, be successful, I also think pick something that you love and get stuck into it. Where maybe it's pinotage, maybe it's Chardonnay, maybe it's blending. Be good, and you could look at some very successful companies that have really chosen to be successful. Ratcliffe made a big success out of pinotage. Ken Forrester made a big success out of Chenin. Obviously, they're in the bigger category.
Yeah.
But as soon as you get down into the smaller wineries, it's difficult to find the specialists. And if you look at a cross-section of the great wines in the world, specialization comes up over and over. And that might be too technical a term, but I think focus is usually the concept across almost everything.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting topic because I understand all the reasons for planting multiple varietals based on your terroir, and you want to keep your winemaker happy because they like flipping want to make like Pinot Noir because that's what they know is their passion, but they've still got to do the day job, which is smashing out a cheap and cheerful Cab Merlot blend, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So there's huge balancing acts that one needs to walk.
But I think as a country, South Africa is, through gritted teeth, moving in the right direction. In terms of specialization, Chenin Blanc, despite a lot of efforts going in the wrong direction, Chenin Blanc is rising and rising because it tastes good. And in general, tastes very good. And so there has been a focus by many specialists on getting better. There have been working groups, there have been conversations and discussions, and Chenin Blanc it's difficult to argue that it's not our national grape. And it's something we should be very proud of. But I also think there's a lot of heavy lifting left for Chenin. Many people have tried to push pinotage as the savior of the South African wine industry. I'm not one of them, but I do have a very strong opinion about pinotage, that the good ones are very good. I've always thought that pinotage is a interesting, wonderful regional curiosity. Most great wine producing countries in the world have grapes like that. The world of wine would be poorer if pinotage were to be extinguished. We should be encouraging those pioneers, those outliers, those dreamers who want to be pursuing the variety and making it spectacular. They make the world of wine richer. But it's not a national grape, it doesn't speak to the greatness that's emerging in the country. Controversial, maybe?
No,
at least they've formulated an opinion on it.
No, it's great to have an opinion, and also it's important to have an opinion, and it's also important to understand, well, it's hard enough to build Brand South Africa, but Brand South Africa plus pinotage plus, one has to really pick the lane. Mike, not controversial at all. I think we both love a good pinotage. What I'd like to get onto now is a little bit going back in time. When we met, you'd just taken the reins of Warwick. We were talking earlier about the incredible women in wine, both in our businesses and also rising stars and past and present heroes of South African wine. What was it like stepping into that business where your mom was already sort of legend status? And was it, because I've been involved obviously in family businesses, it sometimes can be quite tricky, were you given the reins and go, or was it sort of there was like Sunday lunches were also board meetings?
I think there's always an element of Sunday lunches or board meetings, just because there's shared interest.
Passion.
And passion. So there's no negative. But my mom never pretended to be passionate about running a winery. She was the artist. And so when I got given the reins, I was given the reins, and off we went. So, and I think it was kind of, phew, I don't want to be doing this anymore. And so my mom focused in on the artistic side of things.
So she carried on Cellar Master. Yeah.
But it was a very, very small business. I remember at one stage we made 7,000 bottles, or so
really?
it was very small, and we grew it, but we had to very quickly try to define who we were, what we were. Even then, we were making too many wines. not focusing in on the good ones. And we had to decide what to do. So I think it worked pretty well. My mum was very supportive. I think she was also cognizant of the fact that family businesses need to be not necessarily, you don't need to tiptoe around them, but you do need to be very careful about maintaining the relationships.
Yeah.
So it was a wonderful journey. We did focus in on Bordeaux varieties. We doubled down on Cabernet Franc. Over 10 years, we moved Trilogy to be a Cabernet Franc blend. And yeah, there was lots of focus.
And so was that linked to what was planted also? Because you had some economic realities, I would imagine, with a small vineyard.
We also did pull out some vineyards. We did replant some vineyards. We did focus in on the portfolio. We had some nice old vineyards back then. 20 years ago, we had a 50-year-old Chenin Blanc vineyard that I pulled out, but it was riddled with U-type, dead arm disease, so it had to go. But you take the best decisions that you can. Everybody that works with me and knows me knows that I can take a while to take decisions. I do procrastinate. I, however, see myself differently. I'm a conscious procrastinator. I choose to procrastinate when I don't have the answer. But when I do have the answer, I take quick decisions and move fast. So, Warwick was a wonderful journey in my life. I'm very clear in my mind about chapters.
Yeah.
That life is a book and you have chapters. And that was a wonderful chapter in my life. And now I'm on a different chapter. And that chapter will probably also close one day, whether it's in one of my leadership roles or whatever I do, and another door will open. I love the fact that I'm able to live a life and do multiple things. It keeps me energized. Not because I get bored, just I think there's a time and a place for leaders to step out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also follow that philosophy of chapters and be very mindful of what chapter you're in, be present in that. And then once that chapter shifts, close and move forward. What is that golden thread that you think, because you always look back on your younger, more naive self, and some things you sort of compliment yourself on, and others you're like, oh, maybe if only I'd figured this out sooner. What are some of the golden threads that you see in your business and brand building philosophy that you took with you from Warwick, and maybe some of the lessons or hard lessons you might have learned?
I guess one of the lessons is that you can't tell the consumer what they want to drink. And you can't judge a consumer just because they love to drink Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet and Chardonnay. They love it. There's a reason for it. It's like Kentucky Fried Chicken deciding to go into duck. People love chicken. Stick with it. So while there is always room for innovation and change, you need to rely on the fact that the consumer has a particular flavor profile in mind, and also that most consumers, 99% of consumers, they just want a wine to taste delicious. And actually, my mom taught me a great word. This might come across as really dumbed down, but she said yummy. If you tick the yummy box, you're going to go far. So Jancis Robinson once described one of our Cabernet Francs as a 2-bottle wine. She said, Warwick's done it again. They've made a 2-bottle wine.
Versus a 1 glass.
Yeah, and after the first bottle, you're going to seriously give thought to opening a second one.
Me during lockdown.
Yeah, exactly. But we have so much choice. You need to listen to the consumer. That's one thing I learned. The other thing that I learned is over the years at Warwick, we did focus, and that showed great results. I remember there was one wine that did very well in our portfolio, but I didn't like it. I won't mention which one it was, but I spent at least 2 years. It was very profitable. I spent at least 2 years thinking about how I'm going to communicate to the market that I'm discontinuing this wine, and how people are going to be disappointed.
As sales were going up.
And sales were going up, and money was being made, and then I took the decision and I cut it. And there wasn't a whisper. Nobody cared. Not one person phoned. There wasn't a single email. I told our biggest distributor in America, and he said, oh, okay, fine. Yeah. So there's a potential to overthink almost everything.
I think one of the elements which I think you have overthought, but it's been so well executed, Mike, is your storytelling in the wines that you've created. Because you know, and it's very charming. There's some South African wines which is, you know, it's obviously just, you know, it's obvious this is the family story, and we paste it up and it works. But you've really gone into detail. I'd love to unpack that thought process. Is it that 2-year procrastination chats? See, you know, put a few carrots out there, see if people like the idea, or do you keep your cards close and just work on ideas and stories around brands? Because that is also part of the romance of wine, is these stories and these anchor points that make a brand.
The most successful stories are going to be led by the brand, not the other way around. You know, Mug and Bean created a wonderful story about Joe Mug and Bobby Bean, and they created a whole coffee shop around it. But I mean, that's mumbo jumbo. So I am very good at procrastinating on this kind of stuff, but ultimately, if you have a really great story to start with, it's going to be a really great story that's going to have some sort of, that's going to go the distance. A great example is the First Lady at Warwick. You know, my mum was a pioneer amongst female winemakers. She was one of the first women to make wine in South Africa, the first one to make it at scale, and she was referred to in the Cape Winemakers Guild as the First Lady, and so we named the wine the First Lady, and that got sticky, very, very sticky, very quickly, and then 3 Cape Ladies. That was just a logical, 3 grape varieties was a logical brand extension. So these were easy stories to tell. Now, Seriously Old Dirt at Vilafonté is, again, it's based on a true story, quirky. But you know, Alistair, sometimes I look back at these stories and I try to recall the day that the penny dropped.
The genesis.
And I just can't remember. Was there a time when I said, I've got it? This wine is going to be called Seriously Old Dirt. There wasn't a day. I just don't remember it. And so then I want to slap myself on the hand and say, why would you call the wine this? What was going through your mind? And so I don't think you can sit with a whiteboard and brainstorm everything.
Yeah.
Things eventually...
It's organic. Yeah.
It's organic, and things click. They come together. And at the risk of hammering on this, before Vilafonté was called Vilafonté, we farmed and planted that vineyard for 3 years before we named it.
Really?
And on my phone right now, I have a list of maybe 250 names that was the short list that Zelma Long, Phil Fries and I made for Vilafonté. We spent countless bottles of wine and many late nights sitting around the desk in my office trying to come up with a name for our winery. And Vilafonté was on that list mainly because it's the dominant soil type on the property. But eventually, I remember at about midnight, my fiancée, who's now my wife, walked into the office and said, "You guys are drunk. It's past midnight. You must all go home. The soil on your property is called Vilafonté. That's the name of your winery. Now go home." And that's an absolute true story. That is how Vilafonté was named. And we had 2 PhDs and me. And sitting around a table, overthinking the hell out of everything. And it was so crystal clear to somebody that hadn't even considered it. So that is, I don't think I've ever told that story. But
I love that.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah, and sometimes the aha moment is actually, it comes through that murky 2-3 year process. So it's not the aha at the beginning, it's the aha at the end of that process.
The best communication in a wine context does what it says on the bottle.
Yeah.
It needs to just be, you shouldn't have to explain everything all the time. So I also learned the story about double branding. You know, the fact that you have to have a winery name and a wine name. That can be a bit confusing. The common denominator amongst the great wines in the world is they have a name. You don't, you only have to explain one thing.
So explain that a bit more, Mike, because I mean, the famous wineries are typically in France, the sort of region and then name of the vineyard, and the sort of winery name is somewhere at the bottom.
So if you go to France, in Burgundy, Bordeaux, you have the name of the property. In fact, you have the name of the house on the property, Chateau Mouton Rothschild. Chateau Cheval Blanc, which is very romantic. It's just a white horse. And Costa Estanel, yeah, it's the name of the place. Opus One, Grange, which actually is Penfolds Grange, but Penfolds has become less important than Grange. Pingus, Sassicaia, Ornellaia, but and the other common denominator is these guys, they make a wine.
A wine.
A wine. So you don't need to differentiate amongst the wines underneath them. So Kanonkop, one of the great wineries, South Africa produces 10 wines, so they have to be they have to be defined, which doesn't make it wrong, but there's a place for communication to be succinct. And it really doesn't make it right or wrong. But these are the things that spin around in my head.
Yeah.
About trying to really define something as tight as possible, so there can be no, so it cannot be misconstrued. And I think South Africa can do better, and I think we will.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's such a communication. It's all about communication, and brands get pigeonholed. Like we sort of dealt with this over the last few years, where our genesis is that we're an education business. It's like a conservation company there's a lot that does lodges. They're a conservation company that gets funded by selling beds. We're an education company that gets funded by selling wine. But actually, for most people, we're a wine business, and that's fine. But it's such a challenge, I think, for wine brands to, most interactions with consumers are fleeting, especially in a retail environment, maybe a little bit longer in a restaurant, but it also depends on how well that story has been communicated to the sommelier or waiter. That's the challenge, is to try and succinctly wrap your brand in a story, and that is instantly understandable and clear.
So I commonly get the question, will you help me put together a marketing campaign, or will you help me put together a digital marketing strategy? And rather frustratingly for many people, I turn around and I say, okay, who are you, or what are you? And that throws the cat in amongst the pigeons. It's a difficult question to answer. But if you can't answer it yourself, how can you effectively put it out to consumers? And technology has brought us the internet and digital marketing and social media, which is a godsend. Marketing has never been more efficient and cost effective. You can do it yourself, So it is absolutely brilliant, unprecedented, and it's getting better and better. And you've never had more content creators than ever. I mean, TikTok is exploding, and TikTok is just marketing, some of it questionable, but marketing nonetheless. But if you don't know what your message is, you can tell people 1 million times, it'll never stick.
Who you are, what you stand for. And I think something else I look at a lot, it's not so much applicable maybe to wine, but also what job are you being hired to do? So if you're a business, why are people engaging with you? What job are you there to do? And I suppose wine does have a job. I mean, when I drink a bottle of Vilafonté Series M, the job is obviously it's got to be delicious. But more than that, it's a feeling that you get when you drink a wine like this. It's got to deliver on that job.
We see ourselves as a product that allows customers to define or enhance special moments. So happens to be wine.
Yeah.
But I think people feel better about life when they've had a spectacular bottle of wine, and hopefully we can be part of that journey.
Yeah.
It might also be the ambiance, the person they're with, the food that they're eating, the combination of all of that. But it's got to uplift the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
And you can only say things like that once you assume that your wine tastes delicious.
Yeah.
And that you're able to communicate it. And so all the basics are done.
Yeah.
But you're at the top of the self-actualization pyramid, and it's nuanced.
Totally. When you built Vilafonté, was seriously old dirt in the plans originally, or was it a part of the iteration? Because when we look at the world of fine wine, this is kind of what blew me away the first time I went to France when we did a tour through the Chateau of Bordeaux. Fortunately, I had a French-speaking girlfriend at the time, so she went ahead, spoke French, and then I would pull in, and the winemaker of Chateau Angelus would look very disappointed when this sort of South African guy comes out, which wasn't necessarily part of the sales pitch. Right. But going in there and going to not so much the right bank, but the left bank, Mouton Rothschild, going into their, I think it's called the Great Hall of barrels, 1,000 barrels or more. It's about 200,000 bottles. They're producing ultra premium icon at scale. Yeah. How do we get to that point? So is that part of your mission?
I'd love to see it as part of South Africa's mission, and it goes back to how do you define success? I don't think we need to mimic what's going on in Bordeaux at the top end, because I think it's slightly artificial, and while the wines are undoubtedly delicious, they are more often than not purchased for reasons other than being delicious.
100%.
So I think South Africa has more gravitas than that. I think we have probably a winemaking population that has a greater need for authenticity.
Yeah.
And I think we also have the building blocks to build a platform on authenticity. I would like to see the average price for South African wine jump up significantly. The way that's going to happen is, of course, make better wine, but it needs to be shoulders back. Stop being a rand hostage. Stop trading on currency devaluation to get your price increase every year. Wines need to be positioned behind solid brands. They need to have purpose. I've used the word focus twice in the sentence, but they need to be focused. They need to be designed and produced with a potential target market in mind, and they can't be produced in tiny volumes. We need, if we take anything from Bordeaux, it's that the market for wine in the world is enormous.
Massive.
It is beyond belief. It is impossible. It's basically, for South African purposes, infinite, which means that if you produce 1,000 cases or 10 or 100, it doesn't matter. There are enough people to buy and drink that wine. But at the moment, a large proportion of the world don't buy our wine because they are perceived to be too cheap. This is controversial, but a lot of people don't buy wine, don't drink wine at that kind of £6.99 or $8.99 price point. They just don't. They don't want to. They're not snobs. They just don't need to. They start at $20 or
Life's
$30.
too short.
They don't need to. They have a perception that if a wine can sell for $20, that it must be worth $20. And generally, economics will show you that generally a wine that sells at $20 is worth $20. Over time, that will be the case. So we have the wines that are worth $20, but we are artificially selling them at $10 or $15, which is a vast difference in terms of allowing vineyard growers and winemakers to be profitable.
And it's the missing link for the grape grower often, and the missing link for the marketing department. It keeps the middle maybe going.
And what the factor, and I'm absolutely convinced about this, and again, this may be controversial, but in my head it's not whatsoever. The thing that separates South Africa being able to sell wine at $10 or $20 is confidence. We need to think, we need to believe that our wines are good enough. And how many tastings do we do, comparative tastings of similar price points in South Africa kicks serious butt? Or how many top-end winemakers drop class growth Bordeaux and high-end Napa into their tastings, and South Africa kicks butt? We can't just trade on the fact of that. We need to.
Yeah,
we need to level, and we don't even need to get equal.
Yeah, I think
we can still be effectively cheaper and profitably cheaper. We can be, if a particular wine's price point is $20 and we sell it at $18, it's 10% cheaper than the competition, and why not be 10% better?
I really like what you're saying, Mike, and it's so fascinating to me because I've met a few. Often traveling in Africa, you meet guests traveling from America, and you talk about, you're in the wine business, and one of the first thing that comes out is like, I've been collecting 100-point wines for the last 20 years. And I'm like, that's amazing. Have you drunk any? No. I just keep them.
Trophies.
Trophy. It's like a new type of trophy hunting. And that shows that consumer, rightly or wrongly, and maybe this is a new pipeline of consumers that's hopefully going to be coming through, that is looking for authenticity, is looking for a wine that's not just been preordained, for life or pre-anointed with these ratings, but is actually over-delivering. It's got a story to tell. It's got provenance. It's got soil. It's got biodiversity. But whenever you bring South African winemakers into markets, they do show off that authentic approach. And it's something that we see when we travel around the continent is you can take a wine drinker up a ladder and the rungs fall away below them. So the minute you go up a rung, that's where you are. You're not going back down. And that's why individuals do end up with their baseline.
That's a great metaphor.
Being $20 to $30, and then let's keep going.
Absolutely. What am I going to do? It's a special occasion.
Yeah.
Spend 50.
Yeah.
But is South Africa offering them anything at 50? Probably not. So we'll buy French. I've got another metaphor for you, which is also a classic, which reflects the last 30 years of my career. It's the good old story of the dog chasing the car, and then it catches the car. It has no idea what to do with the car, but chasing it was a lot of fun. So we've been chasing recognition for our quality, and at no time in the history of South Africa has the recognition of South African quality been so high. At the absolute highest level, from sommeliers to media to even amongst ourselves.
That's true.
So we caught the car. Now what are we going to do with it?
Does that 15,000 bottles we make, is that enough to?
It's not enough. So we have got more high-end winemakers producing wines of exceptional global quality, producing 1,000 bottles or 5,000 bottles here and there. Often, many of them, I can think of many wineries from Elgin to Heelman Ade to the Swartland to Stellenbosch that are producing these beautiful batches that are getting recognized at the absolute highest level, and they are getting absorbed by the market, but they are so tiny they just don't see the light of day. Going back to what I said about Jancis Robinson, asking why more Americans don't drink South African wine.
They don't see them.
We're not offering them. So if you look to the future and say, what does success look like? Success is that 10, 20, or 30 of these super exciting winemakers in South Africa take one of their wines that they think that they are, and by definition it should be one that they are passionate about, that they absolutely love, that they are fully behind, and they double the volume. And why not improve the quality at the same time? It's doable.
Well, it's doable. They'll need the help of farmers.
And you don't need to produce 1 million bottles. If you can take your 3,000 bottles to 50,000 bottles, the world will take it. The world would love to have it. Only then will South Africa start being recognized truly as a great wine producing nation by consumers, because it's already recognized by the influencers and the media, but it doesn't filter to the consumers because they read Jancis Robinson. They go into their local shop, and all they can find is something sitting at $15, and it tastes just like a wine should at $15. It's
Yeah, and the positive externalities of that focus means suddenly that volume, whatever the second and third wines or parallel wines in that portfolio go into that, high value, higher volume wine. I mean, that would be fantastic, Mike. It's such an honor having you here in our Cellar Studio. It's the last time we hung out was a classic sort of pre-COVID moment in a hotel in Lagos. And I must just commend you on everything you're doing, not only building your brand, which is a flagship for South African wine, but also I don't know how many committees and boards you sit on, but you're an incredible participant in this industry. And so thank you for taking some time to come and visit and chat, and looking forward to getting you into into some of our markets in Africa that you might enjoy visiting. Lagos is amazing. It's got the energy, it's got the hustle, and we've done some great work thanks to you with your wines there. But maybe a little bit of a safari next time.
Bring it on.
Cheers, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alistair.